Watch these two hunters and how I'm their puppet master. Pretty cool, huh? There's a weapon and a gear set combo that lets you do really neat stuff like this. And we're going to talk about that. And the star of the show today will be the Bluescreen LMG, which is getting a buff next season, along with a couple of gear sets that I think you're going to want to farm now so that you're ready to kick off Season 2 with some of the best and coolest gear that the Division 2 has to offer with the new update.
Piece of shit wristwatch.
Hey Bandidos, I've been meaning to talk to you about the Bluescreen. That's because it's getting an update along with a lot of the other weapons this coming season. Whenever that season launches, we still don't know, but maybe in November? I hope so, because I can't wait to get my hands on the latest versions of some of our favorite weapons. Now, the Bluescreen is one that's pretty dusty for me, not because it's a bad weapon, but because it could be better. And that's exactly the direction the devs are taking it, I think. So today I'm featuring this. We're going to take a peek at the changes the devs are bringing to this weapon, as well as a couple of gear sets that align with it. They're not only interesting, but they're really good at clearing heroic and legendary content. And I think with the modifiers coming, which I know are going to bring us buffs, but there are also some downsides to those modifiers that looks like it's going to make some content that we take for granted a lot more difficult. Maybe that'll be the case, maybe it won't be, we'll see. Either way, if you like taking on more difficult content, you need the builds to match, and these ones are suited for the job. Let's get into it.
Piece of shit wristwatch.
All right, let's start by taking a look at the changes from the latest intel that we received from the devs regarding all the rebalancing that's coming next season. Now, any of this stuff can change, so let's be conscious of that. We're looking at the Bluescreen right now, so it's the second one down from the top. So for orientation, everything on the left side or the gray area is where we're at now. TU22 is the future update that's going to come with Season 2.0 and Season 2 of Year 6. So they're giving it just a tiny little tick up in damage. So it's at 62,000, now it'll be 62,347. But they're bringing down the rate of fire, which I don't like, actually. 580 is an interesting number. That aligns with the Stoner, which apparently this weapon is. So this is going to match the RPM of the Stoner as it is now. So it's going to go from 660 RPM to 580. I don't like that. 660 isn't fast at all. You know, it's not the end of the world or anything, 80 RPMs, but I think it needs to go the other direction, which would give us better DPS out of this weapon. So that is what it is, but the mag size is what I want to bring your attention to. So they're doubling it. So this had me thinking maybe it was released incorrectly because the Stoner has the largest mag in the game. I think you could push it to 250 if I'm recalling that correctly. Either way, 200 easy. And the Bluescreen was released with a 100 round mag, which was pretty small. But around here, we take what we could get, so nobody complained. But now that I think about it, it's like, wow, that was quite a difference from its base weapon. So they're aligning that, and then it's going to take a slight hit in reload speed, and that's it. But what's important is that 200 rounds on the Bluescreen is actually going to be a big deal because of what makes this weapon unique. We're going to get into that in just a second, but before we do, let's take a quick look at the changes they're also making to the mods. So this is a screenshot from the patch notes. So they're taking the optics to 20% reload speed, the mag, so that's going to be applied to the stats that you already saw. And then the mag is going to be plus 15% weapon handling, which is also being applied to the reload speed. That's also stability and accuracy. And then we're getting a plus 20% rate of fire, I guess. Yet the rate of fire went down, which is funny. And then the underbarrel is plus 10% stability. So before it had 10% reload speed, the mag was 15% weapon handling, so it's the same. Okay, that makes sense. And then the muzzle was 10% rate of fire, and now it's 20% rate of fire, and then we get the same stability. So it's weird. So we get a slower RPM, but we got mods that are boosting its RPM, yet the base Stoner has the same RPM. So it's sort of like fake, just there for visual purposes, because they can do whatever they want. We can't change our mods on our exotics. So let's take a look at this Warlock. It's actually a pretty good looking weapon. This is one of those talents that's sort of off-putting when you see a description like this. Just point and shoot. Don't even worry about it, is my advice. Actually, instead of reading it, I'm just gonna explain it because it's more tedious and harder to understand when you read it word for word. By shooting targets, you're going to mark them. Every time you hit a marked target, you build stacks. The stack meter is actually on you. So the targets are only marked. They don't build stacks, you build stacks. The more stacks you have, then the more different types of status effects you apply. So up to 10 stacks, they just get pulsed. And then 11 to 25 stacks, they're gonna add a disrupt effect to that pulse. 26 and above, they're gonna add a disorient status effect to the pulse and a disrupt. So now they will have all three. Now, when you get to 50 stacks and higher, it's all the same status effects, but then all hostiles within 10 meters will get those status effects. And all of these status effects last for 5 seconds. So although you're building up these stacks, the status effects aren't actually applying. The possibility of the status effects are pending an action. And there's 2 actions you can take to actually apply the status effects. One is just to kill any marked enemy. You kill a marked enemy over here, then all the marked enemies over there are going to be activated with all of the status effects that apply according to the amount of stacks that you built up. And the goal has always been to mark as many targets as possible. The reason why this weapon's getting even cooler is because with the 200 round mag, you can get a ton of enemies under mark. And so the other way you activate the status effects is by deploying a skill. So for DPS builds, you don't even have to worry about it, and I recommend you don't. Just point and shoot and just know you want to mark as many targets as possible, so you're gonna be building those stacks passively. And the only time you want to trigger with the skill is when you got a priority target out of cover, or you want to get them out of cover so that your team or yourself can burn them down. So that's when you want to pull the puppet string, so to speak. So in the opening scene, when I showed you this footage of pulling the strings on those hunter puppets, that's what I was doing. So you can control this for your team so that they can put more DPS on critical targets, or if it looks like they're going to get rushed. It's not exactly on demand because you have to get those stacks on them first, but it's easy and makes it a really interesting weapon for even a DPS player, not just a status effect player. So you can run this with True Patriot. The build you're seeing me run here is with the Negotiator's Dilemma setup, and this works really well with that because the theme of this weapon is about marking targets and building stacks, and that aligns with the Negotiator's Dilemma's theme, which is to mark as many targets as possible with your crits, which is usually up to 3, and then burn one of them down and it applies damage to all of them. So it's easier to show you the mechanics in the testing range than out in the field because there's just so much going on out there. So let me show you in here. So we're gonna mark and then we're gonna build stacks. So let's mark, watch when one of them dies, then the status effects kicks in. The stack on the left is the Negotiator stack. The stack on the right is the Bluescreen stack. All right, so this guy's about to die. Let's kill him. And then they all took a pulse. You see the status effects right there? And now the status effect is gone because it only lasts for 5 seconds. So that's basically what happens. And so you don't really need a skill. So although it says when you trigger a skill, it applies the status effects, that's also true. Let's go ahead and put on an invulnerable target over here. Let me build a bunch of stacks here. So there's a stack meter down below. You can see it's that O symbol and it's full. So now I can trigger the status effect on the target, so watch. So now he's got all the status effects, including spreading the status effects to 10 meters. That's pretty neat. So you can do it on demand with your skills. And so there's some skills that are really going to help you do this easier. But if you're trying to work this into a skill build, it can be really challenging because if you are running a skill build, then your skill build is just going to do a better job of applying status effects. And you're going to be so busy doing that, you're not going to have a lot of time to whip out what would be a very weak LMG to lay down a bunch of shots to build your stacks on a bunch of targets. Just get to the point with your status effects, your skills. So this is definitely one of the builds I recommend you slap together for your blue screen build. It's a Negotiator's Dilemma. So Negotiator's Dilemma is not only on theme for what the blue screen does, so there's a nice synergy between them, but Negotiator's Dilemma is also getting a buff in season 2. It's the backpack specifically, and that's actually a very key piece. When we run Negotiator's Dilemma, we often run the backpack. It's hard to say no to it. So it's going to increase crowd control damage to additional marked enemies from 60 to 112% before it was 60 to 100% when you ran the backpack. So the blue screen is getting a bigger mag so you can have more sustained damage against those targets and keep them marked and burn them. And then you're going to be doing that a little bit faster, especially since you're applying it to 3 targets at the same time. It's a pretty straightforward build, so let me give you the details. So I'm running Gunner because that's going to give us some ammo supply, also faster reloads when we're standing still, weapon handling, which is neat, but it's not giving us a larger mag because it's an exotic, so we're fixed with the mag that we have. I do have damage to armor on mine for a very specific reason, and you'll see why in the next build. But you could also go with damage to targets out of cover, but on this one, I do recommend damage to armor. So remember, we're gonna get 200 rounds in the mag, and the RPM is gonna drop to 580. And so I'm running 4 pieces of Negotiator, so let's look at that first. It's a crit-centered gear set. So it gives us crit chance and crit damage, and then hostile negotiations. It's very similar to how the blue screen works. You're gonna mark targets, but this time you need to crit to mark them. It's gonna last for 20 seconds. You can do that up to 3 targets. And then when you run the chest piece, if you decide to do that, then you can mark 5, but most of us don't do that. Then when you critically hit a marked enemy, all other marked enemies take 60% of the damage dealt through the crit. Whenever a marked enemy dies, you gain 2% crit hit damage, stacking up to 20, so 40%. The downside is that's only gonna last for 1 checkpoint, because when you enter the next checkpoint, it's gonna clear that. That's what they mean by combat ends. That sucks. It's always kind of sucked because you worked hard to earn it, darn it. Okay, so I have weapon damage and crit chance, and that's basically what the build is gonna look like. Here is the knee pads, weapon damage and crit damage. The gloves, I have some armor here for a little survivability with crit damage, and then the backpack, weapon damage with crits, and then there's critical measures. We're gonna get 100% damage to additionally marked enemies. Remember, that's 100% of your crits. So assuming all 3 targets are the same HP, then the target you're firing at is going to die first because he's taking damage from crits and non-crits, where the other 2 targets are only receiving the 100% of your crit damage. So they're not going to be too far behind, but you have to put some more shots onto them if they're all the same. But they're usually not, so it's a domino effect. For the mask, I'm running the Coyotes because this is a team support build, and the Coyotes mask supports your team with more crits. You can run this solo. It works perfectly fine solo. And then you would be playing into the 15 to 25 meters, so you're going to get 10% crit chance and 10% crit damage. The chest piece, I decided to run Palisades, so I get 10% armor on kill. If I kill 3 enemies at the same time-ish, then I get 30% armor on kill. Pretty sweet, right? Armor, crits, and I have Obliterate. So Obliterate's taking a little bit of a nerf next season, so they are pulling that time down to 5 seconds, and I think the stacks are going to 20% damage, but it's the time part that really bugs me. 5 seconds, you can't do crap in 5 seconds. For this build, I do recommend a hive of some sort. You could run the booster hive. I'm running the reviver hive. So since the fixer, you only deploy once every, 241.9 seconds, that's harder to use it for on demand like I did with those hunters. I'm going to put together a build that I created back in the day. It was a maximum bleed build for the ongoing directive, and I made it just for the blue screen when it was introduced to the game. It's sick. It's a nasty build, and I think you're really gonna like it. So I'm gonna put it together here, so give me a second and I'll come right back and show you what it can do. All right, so watch this fight. Now, this build isn't perfect by any means, and it's getting a buff. I just slapped it together. So I'm running ongoing directive, but not like you'd think I would. So it's a very unique way to run ongoing directive. And of course, I've paired it up with the blue screen. And watch closely to how this thing works. It's amazing. Look at the debuffs that's going on with these guys. They're always ticking. So this is a dot build, and it's really powerful and really fun for solo and group play because you're going to be just overflowing with rounds that give you amplified damage and apply bleed to targets, which slows them down and gives them those ticks. So the changes they're making to the ongoing directive set is specifically to the chest piece. So they're increasing the hollow point ammo damage amplification from 20%. So it was always kind of a reasonable chest piece to run. 20% is not bad, but guess what they're pushing it to? 50%. 50% amplified damage. I'm running perfect glass cannon for this example. That's 60% amplified damage. So it's almost perfect glass cannon, or it's not too far away, without the negative side, right? Because glass cannon brings in the incoming damage to you as well. But they're not exactly the same. Now, are they? Unfortunately, I don't have an ongoing directive chest piece because one didn't drop for me in Countdown today, but I will be getting it. If I recall, and if I'm wrong, please somebody correct me in the comments, but amplified damage from the chest piece is only impacting the hollow point rounds, not any of the other damage that you have on your build, where glass cannon is giving you amplified damage from all sources of damage that you deal, including collateral damage from things like explosions, like environmental damage that you inflicted. And so the way they've compensated for that is by creating the Trauma Specialist backpack. It says increases the duration of your bleed status effects by 50% and all bleed damage done by 100%. So they specifically give you stronger bleed here because the chest piece that comes with ongoing directive, the talent, doesn't give you additional damage to the bleed. It's only the impact from the rounds. I think that's how it works. And so in the past, I believe I ran this, but what we're gonna do, because there's another way to work around that, is to run the ongoing directive chest so you can get that 50% amp damage on impact. And then instead of the ongoing directive gloves, you run the contractor's gloves. And you put status effects on them instead of crits. What you want to do here is put status effects everywhere. That's what's unique about this ongoing directive build. So you're running all weapon damage cores, so the red circles. All of your sub attributes are yellow, status effects. It's spiking up the bleed, but there's more to this than just that. So ongoing directive also gives you 15% status effects and 30% reload speed. So it's perfect for LMGs, by the way. And then shooting status affected enemies will apply a mark, and then killing that mark, your team can kill them too. You're gonna get hollow point ammo. For the weapon that's in your hand, your allies get ammo too. So hollow point ammo amplifies weapon damage by 20% and applies bleed on hit. So the status effects makes that bleed last longer and 100% increase to damage. So you're gonna get that damage increase, but you're gonna extend the duration for very long periods of time. Now, some enemies have some status effect resistance, so there is a variable to that. Usually bosses have some status effect resistance. And now there's diminishing returns, and that's going to be sort of difficult to measure because of all the variables. So far, we've covered that we have weapon damage, so that's just the impact. We have amplified damage, which is covering all sources, and then we have damage over time. The status effects, the bleed. The other damage we're applying because of the status effects is toxic delivery. So this is, well, they call it a debuff, but it's damage over time. So total damage is dealt equal to 50% of your concussion grenade. So that's great, but we're not running explosives, are we? We can run demolitionists if we want, but I needed survivability, so I decided to go with gunner for that reason, so I get armor on kill. It also says that damage is further increased by status effects. So the biomask has status effects on it. Ongoing directive gives us 15%, and then we're rolling status effects on every piece that we can, and that's why my chest piece looks like this. I would take off my skill damage though. I'd probably put weapon handling there for faster reloads, or repair skills would be even better. Because I'm solo, I decided to run the Banshee Pulse. So if we look at our concussion grenade, its value is at 1.4 million, and then we're gonna get half of that, and then we're gonna get that damage spread over time, 10 seconds, except the bleed is gonna renew that. So when the bleed ticks beyond 10 seconds, it'll refresh that toxic delivery. So let's go run an example. Let's find a poor, unsuspecting foe. So this setup is really good at clearing trash ads. So you could basically just one-shot them. So watch one bullet. Pretty cool. Now remember, my build is not fully maxed out. So there's lots of stat. Look at that, 9.8% weapon damage. So the weapon damage is only for the weapon part, right? Not the status effects. But so it's important to have effects like this, especially on LMGs. So it functions very similar, this setup, to like the Pestilence, still putting out damage when the enemy's hiding. So there's so much you can do with this build, but what's interesting is how it adds to your survivability. So I'm using it to prevent the flanks by making sure that everybody is at least marked, even if I'm not killing them. If If I see they're heading to my flank, then I stagger them, and then I can pick that guy off or let him bleed out, whatever needs to happen. Negotiator's Dilemma, Ongoing Directive, and the Bluescreen are all getting buffs, and they're all really interesting gear sets or weapons, and that's the kind of stuff we need. You know, I love the Ouroboros, it's really cool, but it's also not very interesting, is it? It's fun, it's fast, but it doesn't shine. And as soon as something stronger comes out, or as soon as it gets the nerf hammer, then all of a sudden it's boring. And there's other weapons that have stood the test of time, like the Pestilence, for example, even the Merciless. I mean, there's a lot of people that hate the Merciless, but that's only because it's got bad weapon handling. You would basically break your finger by trying to shoot that thing, but now it's going to be fully automatic. So, I mean, it's going to have the same RPM and the same weapon handling issues, but at least you don't have to break your finger anymore. Bluescreen brings interesting builds to the table. You can get really creative, so we can go the full DPS side and still be running team support and still have status effects. That's fun and adds an element to your gameplay. Or we can go the other side, which is still team support, and obviously you can run it solo. You're bringing in amplified damage to your team, so that's how you're getting more damage on the field, even if it's not directly from you. But at the same time, you're ticking as many enemies as possible. You're bringing down the overall health pool. You're sort of thinning the herd, so to speak. And that makes your team time to kill so much better. So you're gonna be clearing content, in theory, faster when you run setups like these, which is why it's always nice to have a support player on the team. So these are weapons and gear sets that I invite you to keep your eye on for Season 2. So farm them now. Make sure you get them leveled up. I think they're really gonna be worth running. Thank you for hanging out with me today. My name is Tuxedo Bandido. That's Tito Bandido.
What's crack-a-lackin'?
This was another episode of The Division 2. If you found this video helpful, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications to ensure you don't miss out on the fantastic experiences waiting for you in The Division 2. And if you like builds like this, check out the recommended build video I have here for you. If you have anything you want to see covered, be sure to let me know in the comments below. And thank you to all the channel members and donors who make everything possible. Tux Nation wouldn't be without you.
When you buy a game from Ubisoft, enter the creator code Tuxedo Bandido to support the channel. Easy peasy. Now maybe this cheapskate can afford to sign me up for that dating app I've had my eyes on.
Follow me.
I get it.